Good afternoon and welcome to the Apex One News magazine. I am Ernest Kanjo.
And I'm Nuwaila Misruri Helmrich.
And on the program today, Somalia regrets as American troops get set to pull out of the country. This edition of the African or Apex One News magazine, we hear that President Trump has ordered the withdrawal of nearly all U.S. troops from Somalia by January the 15th next year.
And as state and health officials in Ohio prepare to receive the first batch of vaccines, COVID-19 infection numbers continue to rise, surpassing 400,000 cases earlier this week. Despite record-breaking numbers in hospitalizations and deaths, the governor announced yesterday that the quarantine period will be reduced to 7 to 10 days instead of 14 days with immediate effect. In this news magazine, we take a look at this developing situation as several counties in the state reach a dangerously high threshold of spread.
And Facebook comes under huge criticism as Amnesty International blames the social media giant for the arrest and imprisonment of 70 Vietnamese activists campaigning for social justice. Will Facebook respond? The question is still in the air. We'll have more details in this edition of the Apex One News magazine. But first, our editorial.
The United States Supreme Court is arguably the most powerful institution in the country, and a vacancy on that bench for any presidential administration is a coveted opportunity to influence federal legislation for years to come. The recent death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a beloved liberal icon and Supreme Court powerhouse, left the court evenly split between conservatives and liberals, with an unoccupied seat that many feared would be filled by yet another Trump-era Republican, tipping the scales in favor of far-right conservatism for the foreseeable future. The Trump administration muscled its way into a pre-election nomination and subsequently confirmed Justice Amy Coney Barrett to the United States Supreme Court. The avowed pro-lifer and Christian conservative proved an even more undesirable choice for many groups across the country, including pro-choice proponents, the LGBTQ community, and advocates against gun rights expansions. On November 26th, in her first case of marked national importance, Barrett's voice joined the court's conservative leadership in casting the deciding vote for the assenting majority. The Supreme Court voted 5-4 in favor of granting the Catholic Diocese and Orthodox Jews' request to block Governor Andrew Cuomo's emergency order to limit congregation attendance at houses of worship in the state of New York. The conservative opinion essentially cited religious freedoms granted by the First Amendment, hamstringing Governor Cuomo's executive emergency powers during the pandemic. The dissenting justices recognized the unprecedented impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation and the state of New York, and found that the restrictions placed on the churches and synagogues in question were located in previously designated red zones, which warranted the strict restrictions imposed by Governor Cuomo. This ruling marks a dangerous shift in COVID-19 rules at the height of the pandemic, which could potentially reshape the course of this health crisis. For many on the left, this is a clear sign that the freshman justice intends to do precisely what many feared, and that is to rely on her religious convictions to adjudicate laws that will no doubt have far-reaching consequences in a country that prides itself on the separation of church and state. With a solid majority of conservative jurists on the Supreme Court, Barrett may soon get the opportunity to play a decisive role in the expansion of gun rights too. Her record on the Second Amendment is well documented. She takes an expansive view of the amendment and interprets gun rights as an individual right that extends beyond the criteria of a militia, as is written in the constitutional amendment. Homing in on the Barrett era of the Supreme Court, several gun rights groups, including the Firearms Policy Coalition and the Second Amendment Foundation, have filed a flurry of lawsuits seeking to expand gun rights in the country in hopes of reaching a Supreme Court they now deem favorable to their agenda. Across all these issues, the core argument against Amy Coney Barrett's appointment to the court is singular. A Supreme Court justice is a lifelong tenure, and a jurist whose interpretations of the Constitution are constantly at odds with her devoutly Catholic convictions would inevitably struggle with an inherent foundation of prejudice, as would be the case with gay rights rulings, gender identity, and pro-choice legislation. It is on this point that many advocates who stand for social justice measures that conflict with religious morality prepare for legal battle. Interestingly, on Barrett's deciding vote in regard to COVID-19 restrictions, recent remarks from the Vatican make it clear that the Pope himself takes an opposing view. Since Americans at home and abroad went to the polls to elect new leaders. Voting took place at different levels of government: presidential, legislative, judiciary, and the educational board. In a rare outcome, the presidential race was hugely criticized by the incumbent, Donald Trump, who described the process as fraudulent in favor of his opponent, Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Biden was declared winner after polling 290 electoral votes against Trump's 232. He won in key states such as Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia. A recount in Georgia confirmed Biden's win in that state. Lawsuits filed by Trump's legal team contesting the results were dismissed for lack of evidence. The incumbent has since refused to concede, but has authorized the General Services Administration to proceed with serving the president-elect and his team with the vital information needed for the transition. Meanwhile, in Ohio, dust is about to settle on the 2020 election. Expectations are high. Here in Columbus, at least one race is still undetermined, as the total votes between Republican State Senator Stephanie Kunze and her Democratic challenger Crystal Lett fell within the 0.25% margin of victory required to trigger an automatic recount.
Thank you very much. Well, if we take the responses of the governor, the Secretary of State, especially the Secretary of State that is in charge of election here in Ohio, we will say that the state is satisfied, because they believe the election went well and that the results, came out, well based on how people voted. For people that everybody has interest, and so for some it came out very well. For some it didn't come out the way they expected, but it was fair.
to know on the local level, is there any transition of power similar to what we have in the presidential race? And if that is the case, is it going to happen anytime soon in Ohio?
Can you ask the question here, because I didn't hear it was
okay, so we want to know if there's going to be any transition like we have in the presidential race.
We wanted to ask Deba, on the local level, is there a transition of power similar to what we see in a presidential election? And if so, is that currently happening here in Ohio?
Yeah, if you can hear me, yes. Probably transition in terms of local election. For now, most of those that contested political election actually contested to be re-elected, and so many of them were re-elected. But for probably judges, because we also had the election for judges, so probably there would definitely be transition from the old judges to other judges. Then in Franklin County, we know that the office of the prosecutor lost to another person, so definitely there's going to be a transition in that office too. So in some areas there will be transition, in many areas, especially for political posts, they were re-elected. There was no major defeat here in Ohio State.
Right. So when are the various inaugurations and swearing-in ceremonies for elected officials expected to take place?
Yeah, most of them are taking place in January. For example, the commissioner for Franklin County that contested for re-election, that would be in January. So most of them will be happening in January. There is no any swearing in like happened in Arizona, where the senator that replaced that is completing that of Senator McCain's position has to be sworn in at this time.
And what is the next cycle of elections in Ohio, Deba? And does the end of these elections signal the start of the preparations for the next one?
Well, one thing about politics is that after an election, people know where they belong. Those that won know what to do. Those that probably lost also know what to do. So the thing is that when it ends like that, those players really start planning for the next one.
Okay.
Especially for those that will say will have a second term or a third term or many terms. But interestingly, for those that vote them in all the time, they tend to forget that those that they voted in are supposed to be accountable, which means they are supposed to continue to monitor what they are doing, and also ensure that they are doing what they promised before they were elected. That is one area we advise people to not just think that it has ended. It doesn't. It's a continuous process, and that they should continue to monitor those that have been elected, and where they are not performing, they should be ready for them when they come back for election. But we know that in 2 years' time there will be an election here in Ohio. The governor's seat will be out for contest, and so we probably will have to see another fight between the Democrat and the Republican for the position of governor of Ohio State.
Okay, some important points for the public to remember.
I didn't hear well.
I said those are some important points for the public to remember.
Exactly.
Yes.
You know, so it's not just to just relax, but to prepare also for the next election. But there's going to be, and also there's going to be the Senate. You know, the Senate seats. One of the Senate seats will be available for contest in 2 years' time.
Okay.
Deba Owaide is journalist, publisher, and editor-in-chief.
Well, thank you for joining us, Deba.
The New Americans.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
And you too.
Bye-bye.
Deba Owaide is publisher, editor of the New Americans magazine. He's been covering the Ohio State House for the past couple of years. This is the Apex One News Magazine, reaching you live from Apex One Radio.
President Trump has ordered the withdrawal of nearly all U.S. troops from Somalia by January the 15th next year. The U.S. has been helping local forces fight al-Shabaab and Islamic State militants. The Pentagon insists that the U.S. is still committed to providing aid in the fight against extremism around the world. Somali Senator Ayub Ismail Yusuf says the decision is extremely regrettable and cautions that it might embolden the actions of extremists in the region. Local news, it seems a new political fight is brewing in the Ohio State Senate. On Monday, Republican Representative John Becker filed 12 articles of impeachment against Governor Mike DeWine, citing gross abuses of his executive powers. Representative Becker reportedly drafted the articles in August in an effort to restore the rule of law. Becker accuses the governor of disregarding the concerns of Ohio City citizens by continuing to implement what he calls isolation policies in response to the surge of COVID-19 cases in Ohio. In response, the governor insists that he will continue to do what he thinks is best for the Ohio people to curb the spread of the virus. The articles of impeachment require a 2/3 majority vote of approval in the Ohio Senate to continue to the next stage of impeachment. We'll keep you updated on this story as it develops.
This is the Apex One Radio News Magazine. America's #1 infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has assured the country that the vaccine developed for the coronavirus are safe and do not compromise scientific integrity in any way. Dr. Fauci explained that the vaccines are built on the messenger RNA, which does not require using the virus in its development, but comprises of plugging the gene sequence into this platform and injecting it into a person to have the protein expressed in their body. This explanation was targeted at dismissing fears expressed by skeptics' concerns that vaccines developed so quickly would not be efficient.
Speaking to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg during a live conversation early this week, the infectious disease expert explained that this method of developing vaccines is a result of years of incremental research, which allows work which would otherwise be completed in years to be done in a matter of months without compromising efficiency. Dr. Fauci still urged Americans to help in preventing the spread of the virus while they await the arrival of the vaccine expected in Ohio by mid-December. He reminds us that we have the power to stop the spread by following basic prevention guidelines, including uniform mask wearing, social distancing, hand washing, and observing restrictions on social gatherings, especially during the cold season.
The 78-minute-long Facebook Live conversation between Mark Zuckerberg and Dr. Fauci was watched by tens of thousands of citizens on the app. So far, there are 6 candidates for vaccines for the coronavirus approved for trials by the government, including those developed by Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson.
A quick look at some news from around the world. We begin with Europe, where online disinformation campaigns by far-right groups has continued, asserting fraud in the US elections in support of Trump. In Germany, the Interior Ministry has taken a hard line against such groups, banning several over the last year. Wolf Brigade 44, a far-right pro-Nazi group whose members are seeking to re-establish Nazi dictatorship in the country, are the latest in that number, after a police raid last weekend uncovered a large stash of weapons.
Food shortages are a major source of concern for Eritrean refugees in Tigray camps. A month after Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced military operations against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, communications and transportation routes are non-existent. The United Nations and other humanitarian agencies warn that with no access to food and medicine, many of the refugees will not survive the extreme levels of hunger and malnutrition that is currently widespread in the camps. The Tigray camps are currently home for nearly 100,000 Eritreans.
And African scholars, economists, and activists brace themselves for the announcement of the Biden administration's foreign policy on Africa. Many cite former President Obama's failure in his commitment to the continent and wonder if Biden will bring more of the same. In 2009, Obama pledged to support strong policy and not Africa's strongmen. During his presidency, however, the former president's administration backed no less than 11 dictators on the continent, including Equatorial Guinea's Teodoro Obiang Nguema, Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, and Eritrea's Isaias Afwerki. The human cost of these policies, his detractors say, was jarring even to the most casual observer, with millions dead and millions more displaced across the continent. While support for Biden's election is high, what happens next is of paramount importance to the citizens on the continent.
And Facebook, YouTube, and other social media giants once again feel accusations of aiding tyrannical governments imprison peaceful dissidents. This week, Amnesty International blamed Facebook and YouTube for the arrest and imprisonment of 70 Vietnamese activists campaigning for social justice on the social media platforms, stating that these platforms have become hunting grounds for censors and military cyber troops, and that Facebook and YouTube are not merely letting it happen, they are increasingly complicit. In April 2019, Facebook announced its new policy to comply with local laws, and since then, humanitarian watchdogs have reported a marked increase in the harassment and imprisonment of journalists, political opponents, and activists who stand in opposition to the policies and practices of their respective governments.
And finally, coronavirus deaths in Africa continue to be the lowest in the world, despite early predictions that the continent's failing healthcare infrastructure would be overwhelmed by the pandemic. Experts point to several factors, including the median age of African citizens, the absence of Western hotbeds for community spread, like nursing homes, hospices, and assisted living facilities, and lastly, exposure to endemic diseases that may have helped boost the immunity for Africans. Almost 60% of Africa's citizens are under 30 years old, and while the virus affects groups of all ages, the number of deaths is most often recorded in populations over the age of 49. Furthermore, unlike America and Europe, African elders usually retire to their rural homes rather than homes for the elderly, where population density is much lower, and this effectively minimizes the virus's spread through social contact.
Society or community has public figures on whom the lives and livelihoods of the people depend on to a large extent. This includes political figures, either elected or appointed, managers of corporations, economic operators, and at times, celebrities. In contemporary times, we call them influential personalities and opinion leaders. But who are these people in the state of Ohio, and how have they shaped the state of Ohio? Find out in The Elite. The Elite, a program that answers that question. What impact have they created and can create on your life and that of Ohio? The Elite tells us more. The Elite is a new radio show that hosts top brass officials in the state of Ohio to tell us the stories of their careers, how they influence their communities, and what they have in store for their people. The Elite is questions from journalists and listeners. The Elite is every 2 weeks on Apex One Radio, hosted by senior journalist and editorialist Ernest Kanjo. The Elite. Know your leaders and make them accountable. Join us now and let's make history. The Elite. Come enjoy and learn.
this edition of the Apex One News magazine, we heard that Somalia is regretting as American troops get set to pull out of the country. This comes after President Trump has ordered the withdrawal of nearly all U.S. troops from Somalia by January of 2021.
And as state and health officials in Ohio prepare to receive the first batch of vaccines, COVID-19 infection numbers continue to rise, surpassing 400,000 cases earlier this week. Despite record-breaking numbers in hospitalizations and deaths, the governor announced yesterday that the quarantine period will be reduced to 7 to 10 days instead of 14, with immediate effect. In this news magazine, we took a look at the developing situation as several counties in the state reach a dangerously high threshold of spread.
Then Facebook comes under huge criticism as Amnesty International blames the social media giant for the arrest and imprisonment of 70 Vietnamese activists campaigning for social justice. We asked the question if Facebook will respond, but as we wait for the answer, let us look at what happens in the days ahead. And that is the story we got in this edition of the Apex One News magazine. And with that, we come to the end of this edition. Thank you so much for listening. Noella, thank you so much.
And thank you, Ernest.
You have a fantastic rest of the weekend.
And you too.
Bye for now.